Hey everybody, welcome back, and today we're going to answer your most frequently asked question, and that is, how well does the Jeep tow your Rpod? So yeah, just how well does the Jeep tow the Rpod? Well, that can be a very subjective answer, which I hope to answer for you today, not by just telling you, hey, it does a great job, double thumbs up, it's fantastic. I want to give you some more informative ways of answering that question, such as discussing the various weight numbers, some trips that we've taken the Rpod on, pulling it with the Jeep, and also just some general impressions of some of the equipment that I use to help the towing experience and how well we've had good experiences with it while we've been on the road. But before we get started, hey, I'd really appreciate it if you'd click that subscribe button right up there, or it's down there as a matter of fact, but you can see my subscribe pillow behind me, because it really helps out the channel. And go ahead and give us a thumbs up to like this video, because that helps YouTube share this throughout their algorithm to get it up to the top of watch lists. Once again, thanks a lot for subscribing. So I have a 2018 Jeep Unlimited Rubicon. It's the JL series. It has the 3.6 Pentastar V6 in it, which is rated at 285 horsepower and 260 foot-pounds of torque. What's important to know about that combination is the torque number comes in at about 4,800 RPM, where the horsepower number is up much higher at about 6,200 RPM. The important thing to know about the difference between horsepower and torque is that torque gets you to speed, horsepower keeps you there, right? It is also backed up by the Jeep 8-speed automatic transmission that I really believe is the whole key to this situation. The Jeep is rated at 3,500 pounds towing capacity, but has a weight restriction on the hitch of 350 pounds. So when we put that all together and we look at what does that mean to the Rpod that I'm towing, which weighs 2,830 pounds dry, and the Jeep that I'm towing it with, I'm within the safe limits. A lot of people that you'll see will recommend that you tow about 80% of your rated weight, right? So if we take the weighted rate of 3,500 pounds and we take 80% of that, we get 2,800. So my Rpod is just over that at 2,839 pounds. So that means anything over that 80% weight, then I'm starting to eat into the payload capacity of both the Jeep and the Rpod, right? Just a little bit heavier than I'd like it to be, but it's not too far off the mark. So a little caveat that I would like to add is that in Europe, this same Jeep is rated to tow 5,000 pounds. Now, of course, that's apples to oranges. It's different certification authorities, it's different insurance coverage, it's different liability laws that we have to deal with here in the United States. So it's really apples to oranges, but what I'm trying to illustrate there is that the capability of the Jeep, the strength that's built into the Jeep, will handle much more than it's rated at. And just a point of comparison, my wife's BMW X3 is also rated to tow 3,500 pounds. It's got a 2.0 liter turbo engine in it, backed up by an 8-speed transmission, but I'm not sure I would really put that 2,800 pound Rpod behind that X3. I think the Jeep is stressed and built much stronger, especially because it has a really nice steel frame underneath it. So it's been just over a year since we purchased the Rpod, and we've had a lot of fun with it so far. We've been on at least 8 trips with it over the year, which is pretty good for having an RV like that. Most people use them about 5 to 6 times a year. So where have we been? Well, most of our travels have been local, short staycations, things to produce small little videos, which will be coming in the future. Just small little campings to get away from the house and to get away from our jobs and just unwind and relax from time to time. So one of our favorite places, and I'll show you a review on this campsite coming up really soon, is Fiddler's Cove out on the Silver Strand near Imperial Beach, a little bit north of Imperial Beach and just south of Coronado. It's a Navy marina that also has an attached RV park, and we really enjoy it there. We've been there many times. We've also gone to another Navy park in the area. It's Admiral Baker Recreation Center, and it's a small RV park that's nestled out in towards Santee, out off of Interstate 8. It's a nice little area. It's kind of quiet, relaxing, and just a nice place to camp out for a night or two. We see a lot of long-term RVers who are living in their vehicles staying out in that area as well. And we've also been up to Camp Pendleton, which is a Marine Corps base close to here. about 35 miles north of us, to their Del Mar Beach resort. And that's really interesting because you're actually camping on the sand on the beach. It's packed down sand, so with no real danger of sinking down into there, but it's a very nice, very interesting experience that's a little bit different from everything else. Both of these, or all three of these sites that we've been to here in the local area, have required that we spend a little bit of time on the local interstate system, going up and down the freeways and dealing with the traffic, as well as some of the local surface streets, which gives us some good experience towing that Rpod with the Jeep. And the long distance trips we've been on, well, we've been on a couple really good ones. So the one that I think I really enjoyed the most was when I went solo camping and boondocking up in Ballarat, California. So Ballarat is a ghost town near Ridgecrest. It's up near Death Valley. It's on the western side of the mountains on the other side of Death Valley. And we did climb up into the mountains from that campsite. It's about 275 miles from here. It involved going up Major Interstate 15 and crossing the Cajon Pass at just over 4,000 feet of elevation, and then a series of climbs and descents from there down to the Ballarat Valley, or the Searles Valley, which is where Ballarat Ghost Town is, and it leveled out at about 1,080 feet in that area. So that was a very interesting tow because I did pull a full tank of fresh water, and on the way back I had partially full gray and black water tanks. So I had a little bit of different weight situations and balance to deal with. On the way back, I also dealt with about 40-mile-per-hour crosswinds, at times a little bit towards the head of the Jeep. And so gas mileage did suffer a lot, but I was very surprised at how well it towed in those windy conditions. I never once entered a sway condition that got me out of control or where I felt unsafe. Even when I had trucks coming and passing me, I had no problem with that at all. And I credit the E2 weight distribution hitch to that. Never once did the Jeep activate sway control on me and start activating its automatic brake system. Another long distance one that we went on is my wife and I towed the Rpod all the way to Las Vegas, Nevada from here, and that's about a 350-mile tow. And we went up and over two major peaks on the Interstate 15 on the way up there. So there's one on the Cajon Pass, as I mentioned before, at just over 4,000 feet. And then there's one up near Baker, California, that's about 4,700 feet. So it gets up in the hills pretty good before you descend down into the Las Vegas Valley and cross the border into Nevada. Again, the Jeep had no problems towing that. I was impressed with it on cruise control. It maintained speed all the way through and had no problems whatsoever. So one that I really tested the Jeep with was a pull up to Big Bear and back. Now Big Bear is not all that far away, but it is up over 6,800 feet in elevation, and at one point on the highway up there you do cross 7,000 feet. The day that I went up there, it was 100 degrees down in Redlands as we started to pull up the hill, and it cooled down as we went farther and farther up, but I kept a very close watch on all of these long distance trips on the temperatures and pressures that the off-road pages in the Jeep present to you. I never once saw anything get anywhere near the red. It always stays consistent whether it's 100 degrees outside or 40 degrees outside. The temperatures are very well maintained and protected by the Jeep systems on board. So I feel very comfortable with that. So on to towing impressions. So as I've said a little bit, I've used this Jeep Rpod combination several times and I've gotten a really good feel of it. I don't have any real serious concerns about it being able to accelerate and get up to speed to get on a freeway. It does that quite well. I credit the 8-speed transmission with that because it does throw in lots of lower gears and it gets that engine up to about its torque peak when I've got my foot down pretty hard on it, and it keeps the engine right there all the way up through about 5th or 6th gear as I start leveling out into a 50 to 55 mile an hour situation, which is the legal limit here in California. Had no problems with that, and I really credit that 8-speed transmission, which I think is the very big difference between the JK and the JL model. At least I hear that from other JL owners who previously had a JK and pulled a trailer like the Rpod or an actual Rpod behind it in the past. The automatic transmission also helps upon ascending hills. It does a very good job at managing the transmission in that it doesn't hunt for gears as you're climbing, especially on those climbs that aren't so steep. And maybe you might have a different car that would shift between 5th and 6th gear quite often as it's trying to figure out what gear it should really be in. The Jeep tends to really sense that it's got a heavy weight behind it that it's pulling, and it selects a gear and kind of keeps it there, and it kind of keeps that torque up in the 4,000 to 4,600, 4,700 RPM range, maintaining max torque as it's pulling that Jeep up the hill. There's no problem with that really if you don't mind the engine sounding like it's screaming like that V6 does, but it's really not doing any damage to it. It's running along just fine, happy producing that power to the rear axle to pull the Jeep up the hill. I also am very appreciative of that transmission's ability to help control speed coming downhill. That was my major concern, especially on the Big Bear trip, but I wanted to test it out. So when I headed up, and I was pretty happy with the way it pulled up the hill, on the way down I had a little more trepidation. So as the Jeep started down the hill, I made sure I kept my speed down no higher than about 40 to 45 miles per hour. And after a little bit of time, I was able to pull the gear shift over to the left, put it in manual transmission mode, and get down to fourth or third gear to help maintain my downhill speed. And it does that very admirably, almost like it has an engine brake control on it. And what that means is there's not a lot of using the brakes going down a hill like that. You can maintain your speed with the transmission, use the brakes as necessary, but no real worry about overheating those brakes. And that's a great thing because overheated brakes lead to fading brakes, leads to an out of control situation, and someone going over a cliff. And I certainly didn't want that to be me. So I want to emphasize again that sway has not been a concern with the Rpod behind the Jeep. I've had trucks come at me at 60, 70, 75, maybe even 80 miles an hour, and the first couple times that happened, I took a good grip of that steering wheel, I got pretty white knuckled, and I was prepared for it to happen. But it never did. I've been surprised. I think that E2 weight distribution with sway control hitch that I have on the rear of the setup is really working well, and I just haven't had any situations where it's gotten to the point where the Jeep has activated its anti-skid control and started dealing with the brakes on its own. I'm really happy about that, and I hope I never have to deal with that because I understand that's one of the worst conditions that you can deal with when your trailer starts getting out of control. And to that point, I also manage the weight in the trailer very closely because I know that I'm running right up at the upper edge of what things are capable of, at least the published capability, maybe not the actual capability as I mentioned before with the 5,000 pound load limit in Europe. So what I mean by managing weight is that we pack most of our supplies and things that we're taking with us on the trip in the Jeep instead of in the trailer. This keeps it forward of the rear axle in that Jeep, keeps the weight in the Jeep and down low, so that we're not having to really deal with overloading that trailer and getting the hitch weight up too high. So with a full pound of propane on the front of the Jeep, maybe some fresh water in the fresh water tank, which again I don't do if I'm going to a park with connections. The weight up forward of that Jeep, or up forward of the trailer, can get really up near the upper limits and maybe even cross the 350 pound limit on the hitch that I don't want to explore. So we do make sure that we put everything in the Jeep. And sometimes we won't even pack many supplies. We will wait till we get to a destination and then go hit a grocery store and fill up our fridge with things that we might need while we're camping. So on the note of weight, it's also important to note there are things in the trailer that I keep packed in the storage compartment that you just can't do away with, right? And you have to include those things in your weight calculations. So I've got my drill in that compartment, and that helps me raise and lower the stabilizers on the Rpod so that it's nice and stable once I disconnect it from the Jeep. I've got some tools in there that I use from time to time. I've got the awning handle that helps me open and retract the awning. There are some leveling blocks in there. There are my hoses. There's the electrical power cord. There's the stinky slinky, as they call it. And just things that generally are needed to make the Rpod work once I'm connected to services, and other things such as the battery up front, which is pretty darn heavy, that I need to have on there to activate the trailer brakes and also to have power if I'm boondocking and not using the systems that are plugged into the 110 outlet. And by the way, the battery's even needed when you are plugged in because that powers all of the 12 volt circuits within the Rpod, so you have to have that battery on there at all times. And those are just weight things that one has to deal with any RV, and the longer you own the RV, the fatter and heavier it tends to get because you continue to put other things into those compartments, and if you're not careful, pretty soon you're over the weight limit. So what's the bottom line? Well, let me preface that by telling you that first of all, I am not sponsored in any way, shape, or form to produce this video. I'm not trying to sell you a Jeep. I'm not trying to sell you an Rpod. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I just want to give you my honest impressions because it has been your most asked question. So the bottom line for me is I'm really happy with the way that Wrangler tows the Rpod. Are there more capable vehicles out there? Sure there are, but I'm not disappointed whatsoever. I'm able to take my Jeep and take the Rpod to a remote location, set it up, camp out, and hit a couple trails while I'm out there doing that. And that was the whole purpose for the acquisition of that Rpod in the first place, especially after I went one night or a couple nights camping in the back of the Jeep. While it's doable, it's not all that comfortable. And as I get older in my years, I like comfort a little bit. Am I recommending this setup to you? No. I think you're going to have to make up your mind on what you think of that. Would you look maybe more towards the JT Gladiator, maybe an overlanding setup? Maybe. I wouldn't think the Rpod is all that capable of some serious overlanding. When I went to Ballarat, the last couple miles to the campsite and to the old ghost town was on a washboard dirt road, and a couple things did shake loose. I had a piece of trim fall off. The outside cover on the back of the refrigerator fell off, but luckily somebody who wasn't too far behind me saw that and picked it up for me. Probably saved me $100 in a replacement part. And I also had the nut, or the wing nut that holds the cover over the stove, fall off, and I found that laying in the floor of the Rpod. I didn't know what it was until I tried to open the stove later on, and the glass top just about came off in my hand. And I had to secure that all back together with a little bit of Loctite on it. So, are there more capable units to tow the Jeep? Yep, I know a lot of people are looking at like the Jeep Grand Cherokee, which can tow significantly more than 3,500 pounds. A lot of people use the half-ton series pickups like the Ford F-150 or the Ram 1500, and I understand behind those people say that they don't even feel their Rpods, right? So there's all kinds of ways that you can attack this problem, but if you're into serious Jeeping and you want to use a trailer such as the Rpod to extend your Jeeping range and take your hotel room with you so you don't have to traverse to and from the campgrounds and the trails each and every day and camp out maybe with your buddies, the Rpod and the Jeep is a good combination, good solution. There are some other off-road trailers if you want to seriously get into some overlanding. I know a guy here in our Jeep Club, Mike, who's built his own trailer. Another individual that I know who lives up near LA built his own trailer as well, and they've got rooftop tents on those trailers. You can purchase a trailer like that as well for about, I forget what I think it's $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, something like that runs, which is not cheap. But if you build your own or you find a used one, that might be a more viable for a lengthy 2 or 3, 4 day trip overlanding, so you've got a rooftop tent to use. And if you're looking at rooftop tents, of course, there's the typical overlanding setup where you put a rooftop tent on the top of your Jeep itself and you sleep up there at night. So there are many answers, many solutions. I think the Rpod and the Wrangler work well for our needs. So until next time, happy wheeling and happy camping. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and feel free to leave a comment below. And if you haven't already done so, please click that subscribe button, as it means a lot to me and it helps to support the channel. Lastly, please follow 4Low Rocks on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Until next time, happy wheeling. But I've noticed that the trailer really does not react to that, and oh hey, there's my phone going bing! And it wouldn't satisfy me neither. Cut.